So thank you very much for accepting my invitation and accepting to be on my show. Sir, I can't hear you. No, I can't hear you. Can I call you back? Sure. Okay. I can't hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, and I can hear you.
I can hear you now. We are connected.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Fantastic. Sorry about that. Yeah, I haven't used Skype in years, and so my communication set nothing is set up for it.
No problem, Jeff. Firstly, thank you very much for accepting my invitation and accepting to be on my show.
Sai, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
So I've gone through a profile, and you worked and you work in different professions, and you're a co-founder. So I thought to tell about you and the work that you are doing to my audience and share your experience.
Sure. Well, let me, I can tell a little bit about my background, but maybe what's more interesting is a little bit of a story that's sort of set the stage for my career. And when I first became a people manager many years ago, I recall that I was very proud of becoming a manager, and there was the announcement and all that stuff. And within the first few months of my new role, if there were 10 things that you shouldn't do as a new manager, I think I did them all. I was a mess. and fortunately, I still, the performance of the team suffered, and as did the people. In fact, I still feel bad for those people. Fortunately, I had a very good manager, a boss who was a tough coach and a good mentor, and who believed in me. And he helped me get through that and really make things right. But the lesson that I took away from that was from that experience was the critical importance of trust and the ability to be able to understand and influence people's behavior in order to see both the best performance and ensure people's well-being, ensure that they can be the best that they can be. So that was the foundations for me of this lifelong journey into leadership. And that from there, I went on to most of my background is in operating roles, as in both large companies in corporate vice president and general manager roles, in CEO roles, several startups and early stage companies. I along the way. And did that for about 25 years, actually. Had the privilege of working with teams across that variety of organizations, helping to develop people, More recently, I spent 10 years in Asia working with teams across the Asia Pacific region around the world as I earned a doctorate in an executive doctorate in organizational leadership. I wrote a couple of books, founded a couple of companies that are specifically focused on dealing with the challenges that leaders face today, and especially today in a world that has the world of work that has rapidly changed in terms of many organizations seeing their workforce move into a hybrid or remote environment. And that creates a whole lot of new challenges for leaders. So that's kind of in a nutshell my background and where it all began with a with a disastrous start to leadership that turned out to fuel this interest, this awe at the complexity of what it means to be a leader and the impact that good leaders have on the businesses they're part of, as well as the society they live in.
So you're from?
So good question. I grew up, my childhood was in the eastern part of the U.S., in the state of Pennsylvania, near the city of Pittsburgh. But the two places I've lived the longest were Boston in the U.S. and Singapore in Southeast Asia. In between, it has ranged from Miami to New York to Atlanta, most recently Park City in the state of Utah. And during the course of the pandemic, I've spent the last couple of years in Scottsdale, Arizona, just about north of Phoenix.
So in this 25 years, you are into leadership and you're understanding the plus and minus of the things in organizations. What are the common things that you understood and what that need to have in order to make things possible?
Big question. So maybe we can break that down into a few pieces. I think that let me go back to that not so great beginning, my own beginning. And as I mentioned, I took away from that the lesson around trust and the importance of really understanding people, their behavior, how to influence it. But probably the biggest lesson, if I were to give advice to my younger self, as I came into that first role, that first manager, first people leadership role, was it's not about me. It's so easy to get caught up in, I'm the boss, even of this little team. And then later on, in much more senior roles, it's not about you. It's about your ability to enable people to do their best and be their best. And when you put the spotlight on serving others, on being, authentically being there to help ensure that you get the very best out of the most important resources you have in your organization, which is your human capital, your talent. That's the key. It's sort of at a very foundational level, because when you do that, you build trust. And trust by far, and particularly in today's world, but trust is the essence of what it means, to be effective as a leader. Your ability to build trust, foster it, and sustain it within an organization, within an organizational culture, is what the difference between great organizations and high-performing teams and those that get mired in mediocrity.
So what is that particular point that made you to become so successful today?
Well, I think first off, success is often in the eye of the beholder. So, the successes that I've enjoyed have been the ones that when I have been able to help others, to help them realize their ambitions, their dreams, whether it was mentoring a new young leader or helping transform an organization. But I think that for me personally, that has been the essence of what I would consider to be success. there's a lot of measures to success out there. A title, money, those things come and go. There was a very distinguished leader who recently passed away. His name was Colin Powell. He was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at one point of the U.S. military. He was also he held many senior government positions. But as a military leader, what Colin Powell observed was his advice and his observation was that as a leader, you should never let your ego get so close to your position that when your position goes, your ego goes with it. And what he meant by that was, these things, you get titles, you get money, they can be gone tomorrow. What you have as a person, what you have as a leader is, who you are, your integrity, your trustworthiness, your honesty, the things that make you up. And for me, that's what success is. It's maintaining that core of who I am in whatever role, I've done in the past, or, what I'm doing today, or what I may do in the future.
So let's talk about the challenges of the hybrid and the workplace. So what do you say about this?
Very good question. I'm a history buff. I love particularly business history and world history, actually. So I want to go back in time a little bit to, and this is interesting, and a lot of times people don't think about this, about leadership in the context of history. If we go back to the Industrial Revolution and up through the modern corporation, though what that revolution drove was a very top-down, hierarchical approach to leadership. You have the bosses at the top, you have all the people within your organization. And what comes with that is, for the bosses, you get big paychecks, you get big offices, you get you have all of these things that reinforce this hierarchical structure of an organization. And then what happened in 2019, right? In March of 2019, the world got turned upside down. Suddenly, bosses were sitting at their home office or in their bedroom, on a table, or with kids running around, and the entire world of work was transformed not by technology. It wasn't the digital revolution. It wasn't going way back, the steam engine or those things. It was a virus, right? And a virus, the COVID-19 fundamentally drove a shift in the way people think about work. And the impact of that has been that, by shifting a lot of work remotely or into a more hybrid mode, the way in which you lead, you have to rethink it. You have to change it, because you no longer have either the trappings of the power, right? Nobody cares where you're sitting in your home office, right? It's not, they don't have to go up the elevator to the big office and, the suite of the executive suites. All that's gone. And suddenly your ability to motivate people, to get them to stay engaged in their work, requires a very different set of skills, because in a remote work world, there's a greater tendency for teams to get better as the tribe, the team you're in, but you tend to stop working as well with other teams. It becomes more difficult, and communications becomes more challenging. If we're on Zoom or some people use Skype, we're using Skype, but Zoom calls, Skype calls, Teams, whatever it might be, that's a whole lot more difficult to read people's emotions, to understand where they're coming from. And you jump from call to call to call. So communications becomes more difficult, and little misunderstandings can easily become amplified. And then, the third element is that we all as humans have biases. They're called cognitive biases. The way we the way we react to someone based on, their maybe where they're from, or their accent, or their skin color, or their role in an organization. We have biases, and cognitive biases can also be amplified and can be more difficult to detect in this hybrid and remote environment. So suddenly you have, as a leader, you have a very different context within which you still have the same job to get done. You still have to hit your revenue numbers. You still have to get your product shipped. You still have to manage staff, bring new people on board, get them up to speed. But there's no office environment. There's no hierarchy within which to do that. And psychologically, that's extremely challenging for many managers.
So what is world before COVID and after COVID?
Tell me what you mean by that.
The world is shifted to virtual world completely.
Well, I think that, and I have to be careful with that, because obviously not every job, is, and not every job can be remote. What we're doing, right, is completely virtual. You're in India, you're in, where are you in India?
I'm from South India, the city called Hyderabad.
And Hyderabad. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I've spent a little bit of time in the state of Kerala. Most of the time I've been in central northern India, many times. But so you're in India, I'm in the U.S. We're doing this virtually. Many jobs, of course, you have to be physically on site and in that environment. But in some industries, the technology industry, the healthcare industry, the finance industry, those industries where people can work remotely, the big change is that a lot of people suddenly realized that their lives were better. Their work lives were better because they didn't have to be commuting for an hour back and forth to work. That they didn't, they weren't involved in conversations, situations, meetings, and that weren't a good use of their time. So suddenly the quality of people's lives changed. For many, for the better, by having the ability to work remotely, either all the time or some of the time. So that was the big shift, is that millions of workers suddenly discovered the dawn of a new era in work, that they didn't have to commute to an office, and that the office wasn't the epicenter. The office isn't the place where culture happens. Culture happens, between people. It's the way we treat one another, the values we have, and the way that we live those every day. And that doesn't take an office building to do. So that's the big change.
What about the productivity and construction and remote work?
Good question. So and there's been a lot of research, because of the size of this global change in the way people worked, it provided a huge amount of data to behavioral scientists like myself and others. And two interesting things happened. One, productivity on the whole went up. So, and there are studies that say in some instances that wasn't the case, but in general, people's productivity went up. Their sense of well-being, of sort of being happy about what they're doing, actually went up. But there have been challenges, the ones I mentioned earlier, around silos being formed, around communications, and around biases becoming amplified in organizations. So, there are dark sides to it. It is, and for leaders, it's harder. As a leader, it is harder to understand how to motivate your people, how to keep them on, to keep people together on task, work across teams in order to drive innovation and get things done. That has become more difficult. So, like anything, positives, and challenges in this sort of new world of remote and hybrid work. But on the net, for most people, they say they don't want to go back. They don't want to go back to commuting into the office 5 days a week. Not everybody, but most people have said, I don't want that. This works. The challenge for leadership is figuring out then how to, if that's what your people want, how do you make that work for the organization? How do you continue to, achieve your mission when your workforce is now distributed with a different set of motivations, a different set of values?
So, what is the behavioral change that happened after COVID?
Yeah, good question. Again, so the biggest, there's two sides to it. The biggest behavioral change from a workforce standpoint was, of course, everybody's remote. And today, with the variants and and a lot of companies, it's more of a hybrid type of environment. Again, particularly in the in the tech world and tech industries. So, from a behavior standpoint, workers have had to learn how to stay productive and efficient, dealing with being remote. From a leadership standpoint, the challenge is, and the behavioral challenge is that for a lot of leaders, particularly those who grew up in that hierarchical corporate, post-industrial revolution world, their instincts are, I need to see people. It's called a proximity bias. They believe they need to see people in the office in order to know that they're working, which of course is silly, because the reality is that many people came into the office every day and they weren't productive. They seemed, they would found ways to seem like they were busy. But human behavior is human behavior. And they were not necessarily any busier whether they're sitting at a home office or if they're sitting in a physical office. So from a behavior standpoint, the big challenge for leaders is how do you foster trust? How do you ensure that you're unlocking everyone's potential? How do you keep culture intact in a distributed world? And how do you ensure people's well-being so that they stay motivated, engaged in their work? Those are the three really big challenges: unlocking potential, keeping culture intact, and ensuring people's well-being so that they stay happy, productive, employees, and don't just, click on, today changing jobs, you're clicking off one Zoom and you're joining a different one. It actually becomes a lot easier to make those kinds of changes, which means for leadership, keeping them engaged, keeping them productive, and keeping them on board is a bigger challenge.
So, how this behavioral change is impacting the productivity and remote work?
Well, when it's again, two sides to it. If leaders are unable, if they don't really develop their skills in building trust and psychological safety, what's called psychological safety, it's people feeling comfortable in their work environment with their colleagues, that they can bring their whole selves to work. If leadership isn't able to do that, then they have big challenges in terms of keeping productivity high and just keeping staff, preventing people from leaving. And a lot of companies are suffering from a large outflow of people because they struggle to maintain those foundations of high trust and psychological safety inside of their organizations. Leaders who are very good at that, who have a high degree of competency, they tend to understand how trust works in an organization. So and at the core of that is people's expectations of them, of their teammates, of other teams, and the experience they're having. And leaders who are, who today are being successful are very good at seeing the gaps between what their people are expecting of one another, them and others, the experience they're having, and they get really good at closing those gaps. And they do that based on a set of very clear values that they uphold and live every day in the organization. And that combination of values-driven leadership with an understanding of how to build trust and psychological safety, seeing those gaps and close them, that's the big behavior difference among leaders, executives, through team, first level team leaders, people who get good at that, people who get very good at understanding and influencing people's behavior because they're helping them, close those gaps. Those are the people who are thriving today. Those who are unable to do that, who are really struggling with it, their organizations, their people are struggling, their turnover is higher, and you have trouble attracting talent. You have trouble attracting, the best and brightest, because today, if you're working remote or hybrid, you've got a lot of choices that you didn't have 2 years ago.
So, what about the leader role in this remote work? How it is creating impact, and how it is the management and also the time management in an organization?
Yeah. So, again, I think that there's two sides to it. The dark side is of time management and productivity is that it can be difficult for for the workforce to break down their day between when does your day start, when does your day end, because if it's all virtual, you and I, we can be on a call at any time of the day or night. So one of the things that people have had to learn is how to segment their days and their time into, this is my work day, and this is when I turn off Zoom. This is when I turn off Skype. I'm not at work now. I'm with my family. I'm with my friends. I'm at home. And that, for some people, is difficult. For others, they're actually pretty good at it. And the best organizations, once again, they have remote playbooks. They make very clear what's expected of people, when you should be on and when you should be off. And by making that expectation clear, it reduces people's anxiety. It gives them the freedom the autonomy to say, I'm off work now. No one is expecting me to be on at 9 o'clock at night. Now I can, if I choose to do that, that's your personal, I want to work on reports, whatever. But the company has made clear that, this is this is off time. And we don't have, there's no, except maybe in an emergency, there's no expectation of that. So, I think things like time management and ensuring downtime, versus work time. Again, the best organizations, they've got playbooks that clearly, lay out the expectations. They don't leave it up to people guessing at it, or to individual managers, who may be driving their team, or sending messages at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And, and that's always been a challenge. But again, the best organizations make clear the general values they're going to operate by. And then there's always exceptions. That's the reality of the work world. Things happen. If you're running a global company, something's happening in Singapore that you need to get, an executive out of bed because it's got to be dealt with, fine. But that's an exception, not the rule. The rule is, the workday ends here. We don't expect you to be on meetings past this certain time. It's a much healthier environment for the majority of employees. So that's the key. That's the key to the time. And then, what underlies all of that is trust. you trust your people. You're not monitoring, when are they on, when are they off. You focus more on outcomes, not, the time they're putting in, sitting at a desk. That's ridiculous. Because, people can sit at a desk all day. Even I can have my little green light on, you can see that, but I could be sitting here playing games if, for all you know. So you have to trust your people. You have to trust that they are adults, that they are there to make a difference, that they're motivated to achieve and be part of a team, to reach the goals that you've set out for them. And if they're not, then they're on the wrong team. You need to find the right team for them, or maybe a different organization. But again, at its foundation, at its core, sits trust and creating an environment of psychological safety where people can thrive.
So as a leader, the leadership role, how do you maintain the values of the organization where you work, and how do you create things, and how do you make things possible with the team that you have? And like you said, it's a different environment. It's a different environment. It's we don't know how what things are happening in different places. People are working in different places and sitting in different time zones also, if
That's
they
right.
are working from different countries.
Exactly. And so I had the excellent observation in question. In the course of my research, I had the privilege of working with a number of different teams, very high-performing teams, both in the healthcare industry, ER, trauma teams, but also military teams, in special forces operators, and interestingly, a fighter pilot squadron. This was an Israeli fighter pilot squadron. So these are some of the best trained pilots in the world. And we were having dinner one night and talking about the way, trust and the way they operate. And one of the squad members brought up the point, and he said, one of the things we don't do is we don't take our values for granted. We don't assume them. So they constantly, certainly as part of their training and becoming the 1% of the 1% of applicants who ultimately become a fighter pilot, and even once they are part of this elite organization, they are constantly aligning and making sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of the core values of that team, of that organization. And that is one of the things I observe when I'm working with corporate organizations. So often, people take values for granted, and they simply assume that. And again, this is a cognitive bias, which gets particularly in remote teams becomes even more challenging. Is if I simply assume, Sai, that your values and my values, we're on the same team, we must have the same values, we want the same things. You grew up in India. I grew up in the US. Our life experiences are very different. We come to the table as two unique individuals, two unique human beings. If a leader doesn't take the time to align and ensure that, I understand that side, what's your ideal team, what's your ideal, what are the values that you want to operate by? What are mine? And then look at it from what are the organization's values? What are the core values of this organization? And it's all about aligning those with the purpose that we find, why are we there? Why are we doing the work we're doing? So it's literally as simple as aligning values and purpose between the individual, the team, and the organization, and taking an hour or two, once a quarter, to do that. Nobody does it. And so what happens is values get eroded at the edges, and they always get eroded at the edges. And I've done, as I had mentioned at the outset, I've done several startups. And I remember this many years ago, but my first startup, and we grew from 5 to 50 plus people in a fairly short period of time. And when it was 5 people that we had a set of values that we worked by. We talked about them. This is who we wanted to be as an organization. This was, and we were good. It was a good team. As it grew, by the time you hired the 25th person, the 30th person, suddenly, I was the CEO at the time. I was no longer spending a lot of time with each member of the organization. I always made sure, it's still small. I always made sure that I was, I spent some time with. But the reality is, you have a leadership team. Their responsibility is to make sure that people, are living the values of doing that. But it begins to erode, and suddenly you have behaviors that are no longer or counter to or aligned with what you want as an organization. And that's very human, because it's, that new person that came on board, they don't come on board saying, having lived the values of your organization. You have to help them get there as a leader. You have to be very, very mindful of that as a leader. And if you're not, then you run the risk of, again, your values getting eroded at the edges. And that's exactly what happens. And when you read stories of organizations, who have these, a bank, that, or a company that has these core values, and suddenly there's fraud, there's sexual harassment, there's racial bias. It's like, well, they certainly don't say that's their values, right? That would be crazy. And yet it's happening. Why? Well, it's happening because as you've grown as an organization, you have people who have taken other values, maybe their own, maybe their bosses, they've brought it in. They're now living a set of values that aren't aligned with the organization. And it gets a lot of companies in trouble. So that, by far, at the core, and particularly when you go remote, staying on top of ensuring the alignment of purpose and values, individual, team, and organization. Do it every quarter, at the very least. Make sure people are aligned, reinforce it, and then most importantly, you got to live it every day. That everybody lives it every day. It's not the boss's, the team leaders, the boss's job to enforce values. It's everybody's. And that was a lesson, again, from the special forces teams I had the privilege of spending time with. Their message again and again was every operator has total ownership of the values of that team. That's why they trust each other with their lives every day when they go to work. That's what makes the difference. And it's a good lesson for business teams as well.
So human behavior is changing information technology, or information technology is changing human behavior?
Excellent question. The answer, of course, is both. But, the technology itself has the ability to enhance, to amplify, to make work easier, to provide us with data, to make better decisions, machine learning, things like so, but at the end of the day, it's technology. And, on the other side, you have this incredibly complex neurobiological machine called a human being, right? And with all of our, irrationalities and our emotions and all of that, and, it's the intersection of those two that both make life interesting and, and create, I think, the biggest opportunities for, as I look forward in the future of work. That technology is going to continue to provide opportunities to better, to better communicate, to better interface, to better understand. But there is no substitute, there's no technology that is going to, enable, people to trust one another better. that's going to create psychological safety, because those are all driven by, many millennia, going back to the beginnings of sapiens, of how we interact with one another as human beings. So, I think that the best organizations, the best leaders are the ones who understand how technology can help complement and ultimately extend our capabilities as leaders. But there's no substitute for being able to, sort of connect with other human beings, to have that high emotional intelligence that enables us to exhibit empathy, and motivate people, and get them and ensure their well-being so that they can thrive in whatever context they are. So to me, it's as long as it's treated as a complementary and symbiotic relationship, I think technology has enormous opportunities in communications, in training, in so many areas. The minute someone allows it to substitute for, the human dynamics of teams and leadership, you're in trouble, because, there's just no way. And if particularly when you begin to understand a little bit about the, neuroscience and the neurobiology and how we work as humans, technology can be a complement. It will never be at least not, I don't believe in our lifetimes, it won't be a substitute.
Software behavior versus human behavior.
Interesting question, topic. I am not an expert in any way or in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm a behavioral scientist. I have a strong bias around human behavior. I have a pretty good understanding of basic understanding of neuroscience and sort of the mechanisms of how we work. I think, again, the ability, machine learning, what can be done with artificial intelligence, I think we're just touching the edges of it. But, there is this interesting question, and so I'm not going to be able to actually answer that in a meaningful way, other than, when I look at leadership, when I look at trust, when I look at psychology, these elements, you bring in the notion of consciousness. And particularly if you study biases, cognitive biases, because many of them are non-conscious. The way we react to people is not something we're actually cognitively, we're not thinking about it in a mindful way. We're reacting based on, thousands of years of evolution and life experiences, things like that. So, I think that, again, technology, software. I built software companies. I have a huge belief in how you can combine neuroscience, behavioral science, and software to do things and help people be better at what they do, for leaders to be better at what they do. Consciousness, however, becomes a whole different animal, because from a neuroscience, from a behavioral science standpoint, we don't really understand it. So to think that we can therefore, sort of translate that and often anthropomorphize it, make it human-like in machine learning, which is a very different approach to learning knowledge and the way in which information is processed. I don't know. I do know that consciousness is something that is, it is not well understood. It's the magic in, humanness and who we are beyond the neurobiology and the neurochemistry and when you break people down all the way down into their, neurotransmitter, neuropeptide, electrical system, then there's this thing, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it. I don't see that in the world of software again anytime soon. I think it's two fundamentally different architectures there, and we don't understand our own very well, let alone what that would mean in some artificial system. So that didn't really answer your question. Again, I have no expertise in that side of things, other than my own work, integrating elements of neuroscience and behavioral science into software, which is sort of at the very infant baby crawling stage of things compared to what some of the intelligence systems can do.
Connectivity between dots, connectivity between thoughts of human beings when there is physical presence and being together, working together in an organization, and connecting through these systems, through these machines, connecting the thoughts of each other, managing team, managing the entire organization through this remote system. So what is the difference?
Well, probably one of the biggest differences is that reading, in one-on-one, it's actually not as difficult. But if you're in a meeting with 8 people, reading the emotions and the reactions is just more difficult when you're, if you're in a room with someone, you can read simultaneously, you pick up on a lot of cues, sometimes even subconsciously. It's their eye motion, it's their body language, it's how they look at someone else. And we're processing all of this often in the background as we're working on a meeting topic. That is far more difficult in a virtual environment. So it requires us being more mindful and intentional, again, about things like, how am I fostering trust on this team? How am I being intentional about understanding where there may be gaps showing up between people or between teams, and my closing those? How am I ensuring psychological safety by making sure that there isn't bullying going on, there isn't their biases aren't getting in the way of how someone, say, is always being talked over on a Zoom call, and how do I deal with that? Because it's maybe they're a little bit introverted, and you've got some other people who are not very kind, and as soon as that person begins to speak, they interrupt them, they talk over them, things like that. You have to be very mindful of that, because again, in a virtual environment, it slips by much more easily than it does when you're sitting in the room. Just because you can't, it's reading faces on little squares is harder than seeing what's actually happening, the dynamics happening within a team, within the environment. So that's, for leaders and for team members themselves, that's a new set of skills they need to develop, because reading human interactions becomes more challenging.
So what is the leader role in this remote work?
First off, the basic role of leadership, right? To help people, to a group of people accomplish things they wouldn't have done by themselves together to reach a goal, that hasn't changed. What has changed is how you go about doing that, how you're interacting with, motivating, understanding, and ultimately accomplishing that has changed in all remote environments. Because again, you have to be mindful of 3 basic things. One, at its core is trust and psychological safety, how you do that. But you have to be mindful of the values. So this is a good sort of summary, right? Mindful of the values. Are people aligned in living those values and how that connects to their purpose, the purpose they find in their work? That's number 1. Number 2 is how you motivate people. And you have to get very good at connecting where the purpose people are finding in their work with the greater work of the organization, and the skills and competencies that need to be developed to enable them to be successful in accomplishing that purpose. So and then giving them the freedom to do that. So it's something I called the Motivational Triangle, but it's purpose, its capabilities or competencies, and freedom or autonomy. And you have to manage that very effectively with each member of your team, so that, I know what side, if I'm your manager, Sai, I've got a good sense of where you find purpose in your work. I'm helping you achieve, realize that by investing in your skills, your capabilities, and I trust you. I'm giving you the autonomy at the appropriate level to go do it. And, I'm not micromanaging you. I'm not making you feel like I'm going to throw you under the bus by saying, Sai, here's a big job, go do it. Come back in a month. And if you're successful, fantastic. If not, we'll find somebody else, right? That's very unhealthy. So it's finding that. So that's values alignment with values and purpose, motivation, individual motivation, and inspiring that. And then third is this whole idea around, trust being at the core of it is what people expect versus their experience, and get very good at seeing those gaps and closing them. Changing, putting in place the little behavior nudges that move people in the right direction, back to the values that keep them motivated. And as a leader, you need to really get good at that in a remote environment, because you don't have the luxury of just bumping into somebody, quick conversations, the water cooler kind of thing, just pulling somebody, quickly, to the side in the cafe. You don't have that. So you've got to be more intentional about those three fundamental skills that revolve around trust. And if you get good at that, the rest of it becomes much easier. Much, much easier.
So which country people are great in remote work? And obviously the food that they are taking also impacts and influences in their behavior.
Yes. So when you say what kind of people, if it just
what country people?
Country or
country?
Country. Oh, country. I've had the privilege of working with remote and hybrid teams all over the world. As I mentioned, most recently 10 years in Asia Pacific. It's not it has much more to do with whether someone is, are they empathetic? Are they conscientious? Do they have, are they focused on the team more than they are on their own? It's not about me, it's about the team. Those are the people, it doesn't matter what country. Those are the people that thrive in remote environments and work well. And it doesn't, again, if someone is, if they're narcissistic, if they're focused on themselves, if they're just a jerk, I don't care where you're from, you're going to be toxic on that team. Doesn't matter. So it's much more at a human level than it is at a cultural. Where you're from, what your age is, all of those factors mean far less than those fundamental characteristics of, am I cut out for being part of a team? Am I conscientious about that? Am I, do I have psychological safety in that team? Am I willing to stand up and say, hey, this is the way it should be, or I don't like this, I'm values driven. If you have those characteristics on a team, you can be from every walk of life. And I've seen it. I've seen highly diverse teams. When they share those basic values and personality traits, they rock. If they don't, it can be an all India team. It can be an all Japan team. It doesn't matter. If people are jerks, that team is not going to function well. It doesn't matter. So, it's human is really the answer, not so much the cross-cultural. Now, I'll say with one exception to that I learned as I was doing leadership development work around the world, but in Asia, is that the way a manager, the way a leader will lead in India is very different than in China or in the US or in the UK. Because, that takes into consideration the cultural dynamics, the social conditions. And so I quickly learned that I could not teach a manager from India anything about being a good manager in India. No way. That would be, what do I know? I'm some kid from Pennsylvania in the US. What I could do is help that leader understand those human dimensions of how to influence behavior and understand it that could be applied so that if he had suddenly had a regional team that had people from Japan and China and elsewhere, he would be equally effective as a leader because he was focusing on those human dynamics, those human dimensions, rather than just the ones that are cultural. So the cultural dimension is real, particularly if you have a homogeneous, all one culture team. But the human dimensions are what enable you to operate as a leader with anyone, anywhere, and get the right people on your team.
Do you observe mental illness and remote work?
I'm sorry, say again?
Do you observe mental illness in remote work?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a big topic, right? I think wellness, well-being, and then sort of the challenges that people have with stress, with anxiety, with depression are very real. And during the pandemic, they have been amplified because not only have we had to deal with the stresses of our regular work life, for many people, there have been a lot of very big external stressors, in their families, with health, with trying to figure out how to balance things. Working from home may be great, but if you have, 3 young children running around and you're trying, and they're doing school, I mean, it's hard for people. So I think, as a manager, again, if you focus in on those human dynamics with empathy, you're better positioned to pick up on issues where you may need to suggest to someone that they really do need to talk to an expert, to someone who can maybe help them if they're showing signs of anxiety or depression, things like that. And again, as leaders in organizations, I think we have to, having a strong sense of empathy and humanism is very important, but we're not healthcare providers. We're certainly not, very few people are trained in any way to deal with mental health issues, but we should get good at being aware of it and helping people to find the help that they need in order for them to be productive and both in the work environment, but just, in life and as a human being. So to me, that's a very sort of human thing that, if I'm a leader in an organization, I don't, again, I'm not a mental or physical health expert, but I have a responsibility for paying attention and helping people find the help that they need. And that's been a big deal the last 2 years. A lot of people have, suffered from burnout and it's because of having to deal with so much.
So as an executive, as a entrepreneur, and as a leader, and as a behavioral scientist, so what do you say about my work? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
I have. And I will tell you, Sai, what I love is that you've got a vision of something, you've got a vision of something you want to do, right? You're creating this channel. And I watched some of your early videos, and it's interesting, you were very kind of quiet, and, I could tell, it's not like, you were trained as a professional interviewer, et cetera. You're getting good. You really are. You're getting good. And you've got a smile that's just, just lights up the screen. And I think that, man, keep doing it. You're creating value, I think, by getting people to come on and provide others with a point of view. And I love it, really. I mean, that's, I think, as others have said, that's, you dropped me a note. Before I said yes, I looked at what you were doing, the videos and that, and said, this is the spirit of being an entrepreneur, of creating something, and doing it from the heart. So, I commend you for doing it. It takes courage to stick with it. And I love it. It's been a privilege to have the opportunity to chat with you.
It's an honor, Jeb. And at last, what do you say to the leaders and the entrepreneurs and CEOs or CTOs, any person who is into technology or corporate world or in any field who is watching and listening to our conversation from anywhere on this planet?
Well, I think that that what's so important to recognize is that the world has changed, and that being successful in this new era as it dawns as the workplace and workforces change, is to simply be open to rethinking leadership. Because most of and this is somewhat, I grew up in that same era, through the, as a leader in the, in the 90s and the 2000s, and all my training was based on a model that has changed. And, for me, the key has been really rethinking, what does it mean to be a leader today? If you're working particularly in a remote hybrid world, and even if you're not, with a generation of millennials and Gen Z, people whose expectations of you and of work are different. So I think my one piece of advice would be open to rethinking the way you're approaching. And, don't let it be, this is the way we've done it. These cognitive biases around, this is the way it's been, thinking it's the way it's going to be, because you're going to struggle if you do that, really. It's just between changes in the nature of work, the changes in generations, the changes in technology, for leaders today, it's a different game. Get good at it and you'll thrive, and I think that's, when you recognize that it's not the office where culture and performance and well-being, that's not where it's created. It's created in the human interactions, built around trust and psychological safety and creating well-being for people. It's independent of any physical space. It's what you're able to do in this very authentic authentic world where it's just people. There aren't big offices. There aren't the higher. It's if I'm the leader, I'm sitting here just like you are. So I need to get good at inspiring you and persuading you and understanding your behavior and influencing it, as opposed to commanding it or controlling it. So that would be my message.
So I'm sure in coming days, a lot of people will get affected because of your contribution, and I'm sure it will create so much positive energy, and it will create so much productivity, production, construction, and a lot of people will start doing things that they didn't do before because of your observation and your motivation. And
Thank you.
I hope and I want you to continue doing what you're doing, and also be the reason for a lot of people's smile on this planet.
Well, thank you, Sai. That's starting with your beautiful smile, and again, thank you for the opportunity, the privilege to have this conversation, and for you creating this conversation. It's people like you that help people like me give voice to ideas, and hopefully, to quote the late Steve Jobs, that little dent in the universe where we make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Yes, you certainly can.
And also, can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yes, you absolutely can. My pleasure.
So thank you, Jeb. Keep doing what you love.
I sure will. Sai, you do the same. Keep at it. You're building a great library of knowledge and I think of wisdom and thoughts that will help change the world. So keep at it.
Thank you for adding value again.
You're very welcome. All
Take
right.
care.
You have a good evening.